Thank you so much for coming on board Transatlantic. Straight from Portland, one of the legend. I love your work and I'm so thankful that you're here. Thank you, man.
So happy to be here, Simone. Pleasure to meet you because we haven't met before, but I've been following your series and I'm humbled and flattered that you invited me to do this.
Thank you, man. So I'm about to cross your ocean. 7 questions like the 7 seas, and we go with the first one, okay? Good. Your Twitter account features a quote from David Foster Wallace, the trouble and fun prodigy of the American literature, one of my favorite writers. David wasn't a fan of ocean cruises. In fact, he hated them so bad that he wrote one of the finest pieces of journalism, a supposedly fun thing that I won't do again. Now, he demolished the ocean cruises, and he also had a very peculiar point of view on advertising. Now, I'm going to read this quote, which you know very, very well because it's on your Twitter account. And the quotes say, "It did what all ads are supposed to do, create an anxiety relievable by purchase." Now, what's the meaning of this quote for you? Does it remind you to keep your feet on the ground? Or it actually reminds you that you are doing like the devil job and you are sitting on top of the mountain called capitalism?
Yeah, well, first of all, isn't that an awesome line?
It's just like one of the best. The guy was a prodigy.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And I will say, like, I slightly blush at starting with that because talk about pretentious, right? Like my Twitter profile, I quote David Foster Wallace. So I want to acknowledge that that's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah.
And a funny story, I actually did read Infinite Jest. So that you have to qualify.
It'll be one of the two that were.
And it is the Mount Everest, that and Ulysses, I think, are the Mount Everest of reading.
Yes.
But I was reading it early days of my time at Wieden+Kennedy as a copywriter. And I think we were going up to Seattle to meet with Amazon. And I had the book with me and we drove up because it's not too far from Portland. And my boss at the time was Jim Riswold. Like, talk about a legend, like the best. And taught me everything I know about copywriting. But his style was amazing just as a person. And he looked at the book and he just immediately tore into me like, what a fucking pretentious asshole you are. You're traveling with Infinite Jest. I guess you're a writer, right? So I acknowledge that it's a bit obnoxious. I will say, to answer your question, it's absolutely the former. I love advertising. And I can't imagine doing something that I secretly was embarrassed by or ashamed about or felt certainly like compromised morally doing. And doing it for so long. I've been doing, I'm over 50 now, so this has been the only career I've had. So I do love advertising, and I'm proud of the work I do. But I will say that the reason I am attracted to that sentence, obviously, it's about the career that I've chosen, and there's some irony in quoting something about it being horrible. But I love the sentence, the 2 sentences. So, like, if you deconstruct the 2 sentences, it starts with. It did what advertising was supposed to do. All advertising. So you and I and everybody in the world thinks they know what advertising is supposed to do, right? But then the second sentence both confirms that it does make you desire something, but he writes it in such a complicated and yet articulate and frankly extreme way that it also surprises you. So in my mind, that's what advertising, creativity, and certainly copywriting should do. It should tell you something to a certain extent that's true, or that you already know, or that's certainly obvious or believable, but do it in a way that is so surprising or so pleasurable or so emotionally kind of inspiring or just funny, whatever it is. So it's that challenge that we face as copywriters every day. Say something simple and obvious, but do it in a surprising way. And that sentence did that for me.
Super interesting because there are writers that enter your life in a very weird way. David Foster Wallace, I read Infinite Jest when I was living in Milan. I think it was about 2002, 2003. So I read it in Italian. And then when I moved to the United States, I read it in English. And it's one of the 2 mountains that I had to climb. The other one was like the Ulysses from John Joyce. I
Sure.
read it in Italian and read it in English.
Well, you climbed a mountain twice as high as the mountains I climbed, because to read it in not your native tongue, both of those books.
Yeah.
You know, I read Ulysses in college, and I did it with the companion piece.
Oh yeah.
To me, those books aren't about storytelling or even you know, the core themes and why we read great literature is to like relate, understand the, you know, the human condition. Those are, to me, are more like doing crossword puzzles, like mental exercises, and they're challenges. I want to see if I can read this, and I want to see if I can figure it out.
Absolutely. And so he entered my life, and then like, you know, when I came to United States, I started working at Chide, Los Angeles. Right at that time, I think it was 2009, he passed away.
Yeah.
You know, and then funny how, you know, I live now in San Diego, but he used to teach in Pomona College.
Yep.
So, you know, it's like, it's so interesting. And there is another quote about advertising that is very much, it was part of a performance routine, like by Bill Hicks, one of my favorite comedian. And it goes on about like, you know, if you work in advertising, you should kill yourself. No, seriously, there is no joke coming. I think you should kill yourself. And this whole routine was printed on a book, on a magazine. And at that time, when I was living in Germany, this is like 2005, I didn't know Bill Hicks, but I was so attracted by this quote that I had it on my wall. And I didn't know him, I didn't know his work. And then when I came to America, it just manifested. His work manifests to me, and I reconnect all the dots. It's just interesting to see how quotes and writing and personality come to you into your life, and they kind of like find intricate paths to like get to you, to your heart. So
language, I mean, we're both writers, so like, I mean, language is the core of what I love, like, and we'll get into that in some of the other questions. You know, and David Foster Wallace, I think his issue was less with advertising and more with consumerism. And I felt, I'm sure you've read or watched the video of This Is Water, which was his famous graduation. Like, to me, that is so expressive of his inner, you know, demons and his desire to find happiness, and seeing the world as like kind of keeping him from that.
In fact, I remember there was an episode where someone met David Foster Wallace in a parking lot. He said this is actually, he recounted these episodes. And this person was out of a grocery store. This person was actually wearing a shirt with the cereal box from the 80s that David Foster Wallace used to eat all the time. And so there was an exchange in the parking lot where David came to this person and says like, can you give me your shirt? I'll give you my bandana. You know, he used to go around.
Yeah, his signature. Yeah.
So there was this exchange, as like talking about consumerism, and it's like, you know, and the cereal box, it was something that he was obsessed to, like, you know, certain kind of things from the 80s. I mean, we grew up in the 80s, so
yeah,
the late 80s. So anyway, my God, man, awesome. Your ocean is amazing. Second question. For 250 million years before the Pangea, the Joshua Tree region was actually underwater for 250 million years. The mental image of this particular American desert was so inspirational to countless artists. And to these days is one of the most fascinating places on earth. But think about, isn't it weird to know that something that was hidden at the bottom of the ocean for so many years, it became so inspirational to others people, to our generation, like to everybody. So what is your Joshua Tree? What's that thing that was hidden inside you that once you discover it, not just change you, but affect the people around you?
Yeah, I know I'll parrot every other person you've talked to, but great question. And I do want to pause on just that, because I was explaining to my creative partner, Rob, about this project. And what I love about it is we get asked the same questions over and over again in these types of interviews, but the thought and creativity and kind of core concept of it just brings so much energy to it, and forces has forced me to really think about these questions more deeply. And this one was actually the hardest one for me to answer. And I think it's probably because it's the one that's the most self-reflective or introspective. And I don't always go there. I certainly don't do it publicly. We talked about David Foster Wallace, and like, he's the ultimate guy who clearly had many conversations in his head, and he suffered from it. But I don't like to necessarily dwell too much on those conversations in my head. They exist, and this one is certainly forcing me to do that. And so my answer to it, I had to think about, like, okay, not only is there something that's true about me, but there's something true about me that I didn't know at a certain point, and then it revealed itself to me. And so that takes me back more to childhood. And my answer is that I'm super fucking competitive. But I grew up in, like, as I mentioned, in kind of suburbia in California, where sports were what every kid did. And I'm horrible at sports. I was the guy, the picked last on the basketball team. I was in Little League, I played left outfield, which, if you know baseball, especially Little League, it's like the least important because nobody even hits it that far. And those examples go on. And so I had a friend, my best friend at the time, let's say I was like 11 or 12. And his dad was the commissioner of the youth soccer league in our town. And I was staying over at his house, and we snuck into his dad's office because back in those days, they would rank the kids to make sure that they could make a bunch of teams that were somewhat competitive with each other and equal. So every kid was ranked on this like 1 to 5 scale. And the commissioner, the dad, had all those files in his office. So we snuck in and we like looked through the papers and we found our own profiles. Wow. And my friend was a 5, like the top scorer. And I was a 2. And like, I don't know that we saw that many other 2s. So it was like, that hurt, right? But that was my existence back then. In a culture in that area, in that time where sport was really important, I was shitty at it. So
No, please continue, because I want to actually chime in on this competitiveness.
Okay, so I guess what happened was I convinced myself that I wasn't a competitive person. And it was only once my career got going and I got some traction in work that I realized that while I do believe that I am very principled in fair play, like, one of my pet peeves in our industry is certainly like the bullshit around awards and fake awards and ghost ads and things like that I've seen, both entering and judging and things like that. Like, I want to earn the success, but I want to fucking win. Like, I love the thrill of the hunt. I love pitching business, and that's carried over to Opinionated. I certainly at Wieden, I loved playing for, the equivalent of the Yankees, like this like dynasty of a championship team. And that was really rewarding. And with Opinionated, I want us to be great. I want us to do well. And I want to win things, win pitches, grow, and see this team feel like they're part of a championship team as well. So that competitive streak has revealed itself to me more in my adult years than as a kid. And I think having the balance in your life of having gone through phases where you don't feel competitive, and then you reach a level of maturity to kind of recognize it and recognize the ills of it, the problems with it, and being able to kind of manage that as well, I think is important.
That's awesome, man. So I'm gonna generalize here, because and I'm gonna base like my statement on a personal experience, but it's safe to say that there is like a divider between like Europe and America, right? And this divider, 2 great divider. One is a social divider, right? Humor is one of them, but the way we are raised is also another one. So in America, and I've seen with my daughters that they are like, even though they're half Italian, they were born here, they're raised American, my wife is American. There is very much like a distinction between winning and losing, winners and losers. Like my 5 years old, if you ask her what's a winner, what's a loser, she knows the distinction.
Yeah.
Because it's so embedded in the culture. And like I found that like competitiveness and the competitive spirits is so vivid here in the States, right? But if you go back to Europe, we don't have this very winning and losing. It's not about, and if you ask a kid, it doesn't really know what's like winning and losing is. It doesn't know what a winner is or what a loser is. It's not an insult. You don't call someone a loser. You don't call someone a winner. You use other insult. And it always like, kind of like revived my curiosity. When I moved here, one of the hardest things to do for me was actually, I'm very ambitious, but I don't know if I am competitive. I don't know if, like, you know, it was something I had to adjust to it. And working with people that were extremely competitive, and it kind of like threw me off balance at the beginning, like the first few years, because I didn't have this feeling in me. It wasn't nurtured. It wasn't like discovered. It was inside me probably, but I didn't know it because I never tasted. Like, you know, so I think that's one of the biggest difference that I found, like competitiveness. And you can see also, like, you know, now there are the Olympics, like in the Olympic game, normally, like, you know, certain kind of discipline, like United States shine, where like, you know, I love to watch the soccer World Cup because it highlights the different like approach as a nation to the game, right? Like, you know, you have certain kind of nation that perform in certain kind of way, mirroring the mentality of that nation. Anyway, this is a long, like, you know, but competitiveness is one of those things that truly like divide cultures.
Yeah, and it is a double-edged sword, and I think that you see a ton of what's wrong in America probably rooted in that culture of winning and competition. And I do think winning and competition are slightly different, because I think being competitive is as much about a love and respect of fair play as it is about winning. And you know, true competitors get very frustrated when they perceive that someone is not putting through the rigor to earn the victory. You know what I mean? And I think out of that comes a respect for the process and for the act of competition, rather than just for winning or disregard for losing. And I think discovering competitiveness later in life, I think, allows you to kind of embrace the principles of fair play much more easily than probably if you're that kid on the soccer field at 12 being yelled at by, you know, soccer moms and dads. You know, you're learning your values at that age, and if you don't learn them in companionship with competition, that's a problem.
That's so interesting, man. Very interesting point of view. Third question: an artificial reef. Artificial reef is a human-created underwater structure, typically built to promote marine life in areas where generally there is not really marine life, and to control erosion, block ship passage, block the use of like nets, or improve surfing. Now, many reefs are built using objects, everyday objects, such as sinking oil rigs, scuttling ships, so deploying rubble or construction debris. If you were to build a reef to promote creativity within your company, Opinionated, what kind of objects would you be using?
So I love this one because to me it's like, okay, how do I unpack this one like a strategy deck, right? It's a metaphor. And so what is the metaphor that you're digging for, that you're creating? So I thought about the artificial reef, and on one hand, it's about repurposing, right? So you take a thing that exists and you give it a new life with a new purpose. The sunken ship is now a new ecosystem for life. Two is it's a platform upon which life can grow and thrive. So it supports life, or it supports a pursuit. And then the third was it's a facsimile that's man-made of something in nature. So like I played that like concept game, which was just fun just to start off with. And then I was like, oh shit, I don't know if I could think of anything that's like as perfectly metaphorical on 3 different levels as what you came up with. But the thing that popped into my head was, so, 20 years at Wieden as a copywriter and even as a creative director, still like focused on writing. One of the many, many hidden secret weapons in that place was location. So the 20 years that I worked there, I was in a building that was next door to the largest used bookstore in the world.
Amazing.
This company called Powell's City of Books. And it's a whole city block, multiple floors. And it's the place where, like, even if you went to Amazon to buy a book for many years and it was out of print, they would then subcontract to Powell's because they knew Powell's had it. But can you imagine being a copywriter and a lover of writing, where every day you go to work and there's this vault, like the Library of Alexandria is like right next door.
I had the same situation in San Francisco. I was working at Cutwater, going North Beach, where there is City Light Books.
City Lights, absolutely. That's where you get your love of Bukowski and everybody else. Yeah. So, what I would do there, it was, City Lights is very curated. Powell's is a volume play. It is just row after row. And so as a copywriter, if you're stuck on an idea, I would go over there and I would just wander the stacks, and they would have like the section titles at the end of the stack. And even that, like, you would wander down, you'd be like, anthropology. Okay. World War I, okay, porcelain doll collecting, gee, okay, oh yeah, here's an idea. That's how you would get stimulated by just random, thought starters. And it was so empowering. It was just a place to kind of become a blank canvas and then a sponge to absorb. And it really helped me countless times when I needed to kind of get out of the building and look for new inspiration. And the fact that it's all used books, so that's why Powell's started to kind of come into my answer here, is I would build a reef if I could for Opinionated. And unfortunately, we're on the other side of the river, so we're not quite as close to Powell's. But I would build it on books. And I would build it on, not unlike Powell's, I would build it on volume and diversity, because the power that I got out of being next door to Powell's was not in a curation or any kind of specific. The benefit actually was the lack of that, was to not be biased in any way towards something that I was already interested in, or something that I thought would be relevant, or some kind of highbrow versus lowbrow tonality or style. It was just a pure volume and diversity of language. And it was great to be a copywriter next to that for so long. So that's the reef that I would build for this place.
What a thoughtful answer, man. I gotta say, like, so well articulated, like very interesting. When I was penning down this question, there's a urban legend in the literature, in the American literature. And there are writers that they are obsessed with trash. And there are 3 writers, actually. One of them was with the concept of use and trash. It was actually even like David Foster Wallace touched on that. But the other 2, they were Thomas Pynchon and DeLillo. And somehow there is this legend that they all like talk to each other through this like invisible line of topics that they're touching upon. And I don't know if this is
Gravity's Rainbow would be my third mountain. I read that.
That's great. It's like Gravity's Rainbow is like one of the best. Like Vineland, I don't know you call it. It's another one, but I think like there are, like, what I found is like that there are certain kind of objects that recur in literature often in different, like, and start popping in different like situations.
Yeah.
In different structure from different authors. So I was like, that's why I was thinking about writing this question. Anyway, 4th question is about this great artist called King Rubble. In 1985, 15-year-old King Rubble painted a graffiti work under the British Transport Police headquarters on a wall beside Regent Canal in Camden Town, which was only accessible by water. A large full-color graffiti piece called Rubble Incorporated yeah, over the years become the oldest piece of graffiti in London. Over time, virtually every single piece of work from this guy has gone and has been removed, except for this one. So my question for you is like very weird. If you were to remove in a kind of like eternal sunshine of spotless mind, really erase all the work that you have done throughout your career and keep only one piece, what would that be?
The Eternal Sunshine reference, I think, is applicable for me because I'm not sentimental about my work. I don't really think about my portfolio, so to speak. And that's for two reasons. The first one is, you know, I'm definitely not the kind of guy who thinks that, like, I look back at the work that I've done, and especially the big work that I've been connected to, and I only see like a really lucky circumstance. Mm-hmm. And the circumstance is mainly the people. So like, right. Oh my God, I can't believe that at that moment in time, that client, that media buy, that creative team, that director, or, you know, what have you, that account person, that we all like came together, because any one of us out, it wouldn't have happened. So it always feels very much like a collective to me. But I think probably more honestly, like, and personally, advertising creativity for me is, I know that there's a lot of people say this, but it's a problem solving game for me. Mm-hmm. There's a problem is presented to you, and your job is to solve it creatively. And it's a very kind of visceral experience. It's like, I always equate it to having an itch that must be scratched. Mm-hmm. And every assignment is just a series of itches. And once they're scratched, they fade into kind of the past and into memory, like an actual itch. Like once your mosquito bite goes away, you don't really think about that mosquito bite. Right. It's in your past. So I just kind of move, like, I don't think too much about those past moments. I will say that if I had to pick one, it would then be more about how I felt about it in that present moment and what the memory is of that moment. And that would certainly be the first one. Whatever it was the first time, right? And I was trying to think about like what was actually my first project. And not just thing I've worked on, but like that went out into the world, because that's really the finish line, right? Like, yeah, you have a ship date, you need that finish line to a sense of accomplishment. The itch has been scratched. And it would have been something super not sexy. It would have been my first copywriting job was at a direct marketing agency in Boston called Bronner Salzberg Humphrey, that later became Digitas once the digital revolution began. But at the time was just straight up fucking junk mail, and for really big clients. So my first project was probably a junk mail letter to AT&T long distance subscribers, telling them about a way to get a deal on their long distance bill. Mm-hmm. But it went out, and I got paid for that.
Amazing.
I was like Ernest Hemingway. I was like a published author.
This is great. This is great.
And like, that memory, that I can viscerally remember. Like, I can feel the excitement and like walking around like I'm a writer by trade, by profession. And I got very addicted to that feeling and that sense of pride in joining that elite club. And I always felt that when I shipped something, but it always, you know, the second, third, fourth, 50th time, it starts to fade. So it's less about the piece of work and more about that feeling. And I will say, back in those days, I was probably, 22, 23. And I was interested in writing of all forms. And like most copywriters, when they set out, they also, engage in their own creative writing and try to write novels and things like that. And I started writing a novel called Junk Mail that was about, and it was such a transparent psychology. I think everything we write in our teens and 20s is like that thin. There's no nuance there. It's like, I get what you're talking about. Like, it's an easy therapy session. But I was like writing about this guy who had been an accomplished, creative writing major in college and was aspiring to write the next great American novel, but had gotten rejection letter after rejection letter, and took a job at a junk mail agency, at a direct mail agency, and realized that his stuff was going out to millions of people in America, but nobody really paid much attention to it. So out of boredom and bitterness over that, he started writing his novel into the letters, into the junk mail letters, page by page. And you would always sign off your junk mail letter as the writer with the name Sam Sample.
Wow.
And so that became, it's like when you put Greek in a layout, you know, Greeking in a layout. So like in direct response, it's Sam Sample. And so that became his nom de plume, was Sam Sample. And it began this like nationwide hunt for who is this amazing anonymous great American novelist who only goes by Sam Sample. I didn't finish the novel, but you can see like the headspace that I was in after getting that one piece of junk mail published. I was like, man.
You haven't finished the novel though?
Nah, I have a couple of shorter ones that I've finished. I would call them novellas. But I haven't done that. And
you know, it's funny. You know, when you get back, when you read the thing that we wrote, like when we were 20. You know, I grew up. My mom was really off as a person. She was like a literature teacher, but she was really off. You know, in a way that she raised me with poetry. So at the age where, like, you know, other kids will like listen to music, I would just read poetry.
Wow.
In fact, my taste in music for many years were completely shit. Like, you know, like made no sense because I didn't really like products, but my taste in literature, in poetry mostly, was like exceptional because since I can remember, and the way my mom, and that's why I say she was a little bit off, because she used to read me things that were way too heavy for like a kid of 7, 8 year old. Like, you know, I mean, she would like, you know, read me like the first paragraph of Marcel Proust's La Recherche. And I was 8 years old, and it was like, you know, but I remember the feeling of those things.
Yeah.
But then, like, I reconnect the dots. But when you read the things that you wrote, so you always like, when you were young, always like come to me, there's a paragraph from a book called Wait Until Springtime, Bandini, and it's written by John Fante. Fante was an immigrant, and this book was written when he was really young. And they asked him to write the preface of this book many years after, when he became like famous. And he wrote
Revolutionary Road guy, right? Yeah.
No, John Fante wrote like different. No, it wasn't Revolutionary Road. It was like this book was Wait Until Springtime, Bandini. He wrote the saga of like Arturo Bandini, which was like this character. He was an immigrant. I got to know him, John Fante, through Charles Bukowski.
He was a California guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I knew that.
And then he actually moved to California, and he became a Hollywood writer. You know, it's like he lived in Bunker Hill, downtown LA. Anyway, long story short, he had this beautiful, sweet preface about what he wrote when he was young. And there is this feeling, and he say, whenever I read a piece of writing that I wrote when I was very young, all I can think of is the shuffling of the slippers of my mom coming to my bedroom and peeking, asking me like, what the hell am I doing? And I thought it was so beautiful, right? Because you're right, the way you say it, you got this feeling inside you of like, you know, you don't necessarily remember the word, but you remember the feeling. Remember how you felt in that time. So,
and I think the writing that you had back then was all it was all feeling, it was all intention. It was zero perspective and zero nuance.
I was you know, I used to write poems. Right now I write poetry on computer, but back then I used to write poem on a typewriter, and typewriter very noisy. And my brother is an engineer, so in college we used to live together, right? So he's a mechanical engineer. And I would like, you know, in this like bohemian lifestyle, I would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, smoking cigarettes, weed, and typing and like, you know, stomping on this typewriter, like upsetting my brother that he would like have to wake up like at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to like classes, you know what I mean? It's like, but I remember there was so much violence in my writing, and it was like, there was a lot of like, not violence per se, it was a lot of, it was youth, man.
Urgency, the urgency of youth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to explain to you, like, you know, it's just like, I don't know. It's like, it was very much like a Joy Division
Yeah.
type of feeling, man. I don't know. Anyway, go, fifth question.
Okay.
Recently, I was made aware of a peculiar fact by my wife, actually. In English, Pacific Ocean has 3 seas. And each of these seas is actually pronounced differently.
That's crazy.
That's crazy, right? It's like, this is one of the things. She came to me one day, she told me this. And these are like random discovery to me. Another random discovery was like, I was watching Apocalypse Now, and when they arrive where Kurtz is, and Dennis Sopper welcome, like, you know, Martin Sheen, and he's kind of photographer, and he starts,
hit the siren.
Yeah, and he starts talking about Captain Kurtz, right? And then he say, you know, he's a great man. It's a great man. He say things like, do you know that's like the word? Do you know that life has the word "if" in it? And then I thought, oh shit, it's true. Like, the word life has the letter "if" in it. I never even paid attention. It's so beautiful, right? Isn't that beautiful? I mean, "if" is the essence of life. Anyway, man.
I love that scene, by the way.
Oh, that scene is like, oh my God, man. I say this multiple times on these, like, you know, podcasts, but like Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite movies all time. And sometimes you think like even like the way it begins, right? Like those like hills on fires. And then like I read a script, and the script say, "Hills on fire, pan over, helicopter. We hear This Is the End" by Jim Morrison in the background. And I say, holy fuck, man. Like, how can you even write like a script and think like, okay, and then with the music, we're going to have Jim Morrison. And it's like, anyway, dude, like, that's just another level.
Yeah.
Okay. Talking about Pacific Ocean, the 3 seas are pronounced differently. Now, I immediately looked for a deeper meaning when I discovered this. So here's what I came up with. The 3 seas pronounced different teach us that things that appear to be the same, not always, they need to be treated as such. And I think that this is something that the advertising industry is struggling a lot with. In fact, let's take the sea of copywriter. All I see around when recruiting talent is the same fucking job description. It's like cookie cutter. Like boom, 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 the same. So what is your take on this? You have an agency now. So recruiting talent is probably the most important things that you had to go through. What do you think about this uniformity that there is in our industry?
Well, and quickly, I want to say, like, I want to agree with what you also acknowledge, which is so true to ad agencies themselves. Every new first meeting I have with clients where we're introducing Opinionated to them is, I'm sure, you know, what does it mean to be an ad agency in this day and age? And we have to go through a process of explaining, when we say we're an ad agency, what do we mean? But I'll put that to the side. The copywriter, I think you're also totally accurate on 2 levels. One is how agencies look for copywriters, meaning like job postings or looking for new people, and then also how copywriters are selling themselves. You know, on the agency side with postings, it's like asking for very kind of rote information, years of experience minimum, maybe some information about specificity around the category, and then the channels that you've worked in, and that's kind of it. And then the way a creative presents themselves, a copywriter presents themselves, it's like, you know, back in the day, you had a resume and you had a physical portfolio to kind of show yourself. And now you have literally the internet, right? So anything you could imagine to articulate how you're different, you have the opportunity to do that. And it doesn't really happen. Maybe they add, you know, some funny self-deprecating paragraph about that thing they did when they were a kid or whatever. But like, for the most part, it is still very cookie cutter. What's totally true though, is that as creative directors, we completely categorize the shit out of copywriters, especially in big creative departments. Like when I was at Wieden,
right,
we would have all sorts of ridiculous ways of thinking about the copywriter who swings for the fences every time and works really good with a ridiculously large budget, but otherwise is totally helpless. Or the writer's writer who has, you know, a master's degree in literature and writes the shit out of a manifesto, but couldn't come up with a concept to save their lives. Or the, you know, the copywriter who's not really a copywriter because all they do is come up with really interesting, creative stunts. Or equally the visual wordsmith, the person who comes up with these great scripts, but there's never dialogue. Conversely, the wonderful comedic dialogue writer. So like you go on and on and on thinking about the craft and getting highly specific about the need. The perfect scenario from a creative director's perspective is that you've got this wonderful department where you can go, okay, this job calls for Ryan. And then Ryan gets the gig because in your mind, they're a natural for what the doctor ordered in that case. And I think, you know, in a smaller agency like Opinionated is, we've got 4 copywriters on staff. So I certainly can't have that breadth of diversity, you know, at hand, but we still bring in freelancers all the time. And when we do bring in freelancers, you know, I'm a copywriter of a certain age, so the people I know are also fairly senior. When we bring them in, they're fairly expensive. So we have to do casting. We can't take risks on a big senior creative freelance gig. So I go to the people I know because I can categorize those men and women from previous relationships that I have at Wieden or wherever it is, and I know exactly the type that I'm getting and why. But in a world of full potential of how you articulate yourself, I would love to see copywriters understand more of the creative director's headspace about how we cast. It's a casting game. Like we always say it's a talent game. Well, okay, more specifically, it's a casting game.
The more, see, you say something so insightful. And I'm sure that like people like in Europe and across the States, like we're listening to this, like they can truly like, you know, absorb every single word. But when you say about it's a casting game, it's so interesting because a few months ago, I had a class. I was invited to actually speak at the to MBA students at the Loyola Marymount University, and my keynote was about method acting in advertising, which seems strange, right? But the way I do it, like, you know, whenever I like, there is a brief landing in on my desk, right? To me, it's not different than being an actor. I try to put myself in the shoes of the consumer. I try to live the product. I try to think in the product. So like for the time being that I'm working obsessively on a project, I become that person. I try to become that person. And so I truly believe that, and I use, most of the time I use like my personal experience. As you say, like, you know, you used to go to the bookstore and maybe like a book will inspire you. So you use your personal experience, your emotion into the work. Sometimes they're visible, sometimes they're not visible, but there is a part of you in the work, right?
Sure.
In your work. And so
it's that combination of those two things that make it both correct and right for the category or for the brand, and also incredibly unique because it only came from you. Like
that's it. You say something when you were talking about, I don't remember, Simone, I don't remember the work, I remember the feeling that I had when I was doing something. Is the same answer that I think one actor, I don't know if it was Leonardo DiCaprio or someone else, was interviewed during a talk show, and they asked him to unpack all the characters and say, you know, it's like, I'm not really attached to the character, but I do remember how I felt when I was playing the characters. See, there is still this like parallelism between like being somehow we are actor, we act as if, right? Like, you know, if you give me a brief on like a detergent, I try to become the person that go on the grocery store or Amazon and buy the detergent, trying to get to think like that, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's very interesting what you say about casting for the right person.
Yep.
This question, Lycidas is a poem by John Milton, written in 1637 as a pastoral elegy. It is dedicated to the memory of Edward King, a friend of Milton, who drowned when his ship sank in the Irish Sea. The poem is 193 lines in length and is irregularly rhymed. It is from a line in Lycidas that Thomas Wolfe took the name of one of his novels. And here's the line: "Look homeward, angel, now, and melt with Ruth, and oh yeah, dolphins, waft the hapless youth." You are the captain of an independent ship called Opinionated. We talk about this, sailing the advertising ocean. Do you find yourself looking homeward whenever there is like a hard time in your life? In other words, the place where you grew up, the Northern California, Menlo Park, you grew up in Menlo Park, give you strength, or you take strength from some other places or sources?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a super like kind of reflective cause for reflection, you know, because it makes you really look at the industry you've chosen and how you feel personally, like are you comfortable in it? And I don't think it's a surprising answer, because I think most people feel this way, but our industry is incredibly insecure.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's really good reasons for that. Sorry, there's a dog barking. We have a lot of dogs. I'm actually at the office. You can see out there.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I was actually wondering about the beautiful background. I was like, dude, that house is awesome.
Yeah, no. It's the office. Yeah, when you're small and independent, and you're in a pandemic, if everyone's vaccinated, you go back to work.
That's beautiful.
I think that our industry is incredibly insecure, and I think there's really good reasons for that. You know, I think creative people are insecure by nature because the common denominator of what makes us good is that we're outsiders. We observe the status quo, the masses, the culture, and we find unusual, like as you were talking about in the Apocalypse Now, you discover things that are unusual that most people see every day and don't think twice about, right? Like if is in the middle of life. I think that's the job, is to be observational. But that can only happen if you feel on the outside of something. And if you're an outsider, you feel insecure. I think that agencies are insecure because, as we also have talked about or touched on, is what the fuck is an ad agency these days? What is it, the purpose it serves? You know, you're constantly fighting out to have to hold on to clients. The products that we make, we don't own, and it's not like software. Once we make it, we can just replicate it and sell it 1 million times. So our businesses are fairly insecure. And then the industry itself, it's like the horrible question that nags all of our minds in the dark of night is, if they stopped advertising, would it matter? And like, that sucks. Like we're all wrestling with that every day. That simple existential question.
But I remember this quote: if you stop advertising to save money, it's like stopping the clock to save time.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
But since that can't happen, we don't know. Scarily enough, they can stop advertising and see what happens. And sometimes nothing much happens. So, you know, I think that we live in an insecure environment. And most of us as creative people, even when we get to an agency, sometimes, you know, there's imposter syndrome, or like, do we fit in? You know, when I got to Wieden, I didn't come in for Nike. I came in for jobs that were a lot less sexy and kind of proved my worth, you know, day by day. But I always felt like an outsider there, an imposter, even when I was, you know, helping run the place. So long ago, I realized that I needed an escape valve from my day job, from my career. And I've done a good job of maintaining all of my relationships, and my social universe is pretty advertising free. You know, Portland is not a company town or an industry town like New York is, or even sometimes San Francisco can be. So when I leave work, it's not a bunch of ad people. It's people that, you know, I met through my kids and old friends and stuff like that. But then, you know, and this is a long way of saying it's not so much Menlo Park, but it is about finding home away from advertising that rebuilds my confidence. Because at the core of that is my family. And My family has certainly in the last 15 years faced a ton of health-related adversity that has been in many ways, solidifying and helping us come together and understand the power of support, emotional support. And that has been really important and empowering. And my wife and kids, so I've got 2 kids as well. One's in college, one's in high school, but I know that they think what I do is really cool and they're very proud of me. And I feel that energy from them all the time. And so that is a source of power and rejuvenation. And funny note, even here at the agency, I've brought home in a little bit. So my mom is our HR director.
Oh my God. I think I read about that when you guys opened.
Yeah.
I think I read about that.
Which I will say, as long as you have a good relationship with your mom, it is an incredible experience. It's
amazing.
As 2 adults, it's the ultimate, now she sees me as an adult, I see her as a peer. We work together. I'll come home, after a few days, my wife will say, "Have you talked to your mom lately?" I'm like, "Well, yes, she was in status this morning."
Look homeward all the time, man. It's
yeah.
That's beautiful. Hey, Mark, we arrived and I see the shore, and this is the last question we ask all our guests. If there was a wind that blow your sail, and if you were to name it, what would the name be?
All right. This was the second to the hardest question because it's so specific. And my glib first thought was, well, how about Lila? Because that was my choice for my daughter's name, but I got overruled. And I haven't gotten over it because I still like that name, Lila.
What's your daughter's name?
Mia.
Mia, okay. That's
so close. But that's also not very relevant to the audience. So I pushed myself to think of something else. And, I think the ultimate driver for me personally that keeps me going, that keeps me engaged in a business that can be very frustrating and very difficult is curiosity. I'm always super curious about the next piece of business. You talked about method acting. My favorite website is Wikipedia because I will go down the most ridiculous black holes of Wikipedia learning about something. I just am curious. I just want to know what that
it's like is. Wikipedia, the way, I don't know how you read Wikipedia because it's one of my favorite sites too, but the way I read it is actually very much how David Foster Wallace wrote with hypertext, right?
Yes.
And footnotes. So you go down this rabbit hole and this path, clicking on a link. That is, I think that's the genius of David Foster Wallace. I go back to the first question where he literally visualized a way of reading that we have now, which is
so true.
Text. You know what I mean?
That is so true.
He did it 20 years earlier, and that's what is fucking amazing.
Yeah, and it's how I watch TV now. I'll sit there with my phone with Wikipedia open if I'm watching a show. And it's wait, what's that reference? I need to know. What do they mean by that?
You go to page. You go through your footnotes. So.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and just to conclude this, when I got your list of questions and when I started to watch and the nautical theme and the sevens, it's I became really interested in you and curious about your background. And I would want to do this whole interview all over again and ask you all these questions because you are an interesting person and I'm curious about what makes you you. So yeah, I think curiosity drives a copywriter and probably all creative people and all people in advertising, but I feel it personally as a copywriter and it keeps me, certainly when I left Wieden to start Opinionated, let's just say that the projects got a little smaller. And if it wasn't for curiosity about, Bob's Discount Furniture, which was, I think, our first client, and that ain't Nike, I was still as curious about that company as I was about Nike and about the people. I wanted to know what made them tick. I wanted to go to Connecticut and see their place. I wanted to know about Bob. I wanted to know about furniture, all of it. If you're curious, that's our stay hungry.
It's to conclude, I think it's great. So I just read yesterday on one of, I think you wrote an article about the fact that Opinionated is one of the agencies that actually increased 12% during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. so much. Like, this is so admirable, man, because only a few people can do that. Only a few people can leave a place after like so many years that shape you and like go on their own and be successful in this time. You're one of them. So like, I wish you guys all the best. And really, like, thanks so much for your time. I mean, this was like extremely, I gotta say, revealing to me, because the only contact I had with you all these years, it was like your picture on LinkedIn. That's where you wear the sunglasses, and every time, I don't know why, because you didn't even look like, but thought of you as the Blue Brothers, like with John Belushi. And every time this picture would pop up, I was like, oh yeah, of course, like Blue Brothers. And it's like, you know what I mean? I love the picture, don't change it. I mean, it's been like that for a while.
It's been like that forever, yeah. It's funny how we know each other through like these weird little windows of social media.
It's funny, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, man, thank you so much.
It was a real pleasure, man. I loved it.
Okay, bye.